towns have downtowns. Sinton has a downtown. You know, we
A
never
square.
Huh?
A square.
A square, but buildings that are all a big block of buildings that go all the way down, and we never had that here. Everything here was just hodgepodge. Throw it up here, throw it up there.
We almost did though. This was
He was trying that here.
the next best thing.
That's right. He was trying to put in a downtown, except for 1919 wouldn't let him do it. You know, wouldn't 1919 or 42? 42 board. Yeah, 42 took this one out.
And Munsell
But it's
wasn't
always a
here.
storm.
Munsell wasn't here in 1990.
That's right. No, he was dead in 31. I think he died 31, 32.
34.
Was it 34?
So-
It was
something
early
like that.
30s.
You're,
Because he was a young man.
You're so connected with so many old families. Who do you remember that was a real character
There were a few.
from the generation prior to the Second World War?
Like I was telling Mark today, Kate Matthews Carson's Rhodes. I'll get all the names in a row right here. She was Matthews. Her and my mom, but they were first cousins, and they were best friends. They lived right across the street from each other. And we spent a lot of time at Kate Rhodes' house, right? And Dusty'd be out there building animals, and I'd go out there and watch him build them, you know, watch him put the concrete on them and stuff. Kate used to do this thing, after Dusty had passed away, Kate would think about passing away. And she would get on her finest dress, do all of her makeup, and then go lay on her bed and have people, I don't know who did it. I told Mark I wish I knew who did that, because they would take pictures of her so that she could pick out the picture she wanted to give to the funeral guy, so when she died, that's what she wanted to look like. And my great-grandma, used to get on her all the time. Kate, why are you doing that? It's crazy. You know, it's just not something you do, but that's something. Kate wanted to look good. She wanted to look good when she went. Kate was pretty old when she finally passed away. God, I bet she was in her 90s pretty well. All them old women lived in their 90s. My great-grandma made it to 90-something. You know, they all made it to their 90s.
Now, Kate was a Matthews.
She's Matthews.
But she left and went to Galveston or something like
Yeah,
that.
they went to Galveston.
And then came back here later on.
Yeah, my great-grandma, my grandma, Kate, and Anna all lived in a big house up there. In fact, I think y'all may have a picture of the house. I got one somewhere too. It's a big, just a wooden straight-up house. And the one I've got is there's a stairway going up, and we don't know which adult it is, but the two girls are sitting on the top step in the picture. They all moved up there to Galveston for a while. Galveston and Port Aransas were pretty interchangeable in those days. The Bouillons went up there and came back. The Sims went up there and came back. I mean, you know, there was work up there when there wasn't work here. And if you look on the censuses, you'll find them here in 10, there in 20, here in 30. Back and forth like that. And the exact time they move, I couldn't tell you, but they bounced around a lot. And Galveston was the interchangeable place. Sims came from Galveston. Teller came from Galveston. Both of them with U.S. Life Service. They both, well, actually, by the time Teller came down here, it was already been named the Coast Guard.
But Pop Sims or his father came?
His father, okay, there's Alan Sims Sr., then there's Alan Sims Jr. and Bill Sims. They were brothers. And here's the funny part. Alan Sims was the second son. He was named after his father, but he's the second son. First son was named Bill Sims, and it was William Francis, and he was actually named after his mother's father, who was William Francis Simonton. Simonton. He was named after his grandfather. The second one was named after his father. And you'll find that a lot. And another thing you'll find a lot in those old censuses is this. Second, third daughters being named after their mother. A lot of them are named after their mothers.
Right. Like Alice White.
White, yeah. Named like that.
That's not uncommon.
Well, Kate Rhodes, she had one daughter named Anna by Carson's, right? And Anna was named after Kate's grandmother, Frondelich, who was Anna Chavonder Frondelich. But they used the Anna part. That's who Anna was named after. They loved to keep, a lot of the family names kept coming down the line back then. You know? God, I can think of millions of them. In my family, it was always Scott. Everybody is Scott. There's 5 Scotts, you know, after my grandfather. That one came down the line. And in my grandfather's family, when they came, he had 2 sisters, and his second sister was named after his mother, whose name was Anna. So, the name thing, and they changed their names a lot. like Amanda Molly Frondelich, who was my great-great-grandmother. By the time she got married, she changed her name to Mary Amanda and dropped the Molly. But I'm told maybe that has something to do with their Catholic faith, that they did that back then. They would take one of their names and they would change it to Mary. Because I find that a lot in the censuses. And then looking at birth certificates where they've actually changed their names, and it's always to Mary. Always. And at least 3 times it's happened in my family. My great-grandma became Mary Marguerite. My grandmother, who was Famey Jane, became Famey Mary. And her mother became Mary Amanda instead of Mary Molly. 3 times right straight in a row they did that. They all changed them. And they lied about their birthdays a lot back then, too. That's why I was teasing Marcy when they came on and said she was 80. I said, are you sure she's 80? Because she told that story that night about not having a birth certificate when she was born, and the doctor, how many years later, figured it up for her. Tried to remember it. They weren't real keen on paperwork in those days. They were more keen on birth certificates than they were on death certificates. That's something you can hardly find at all before 1915. It's amazing that there's that one of Frondelich exists at all. Because if you go over to the courthouses, and I've been to all of them in the area, they'll tell you, man, there's hardly anything in existence before 1915. That's when they really got serious about keeping it. So.
All right, now back to the old timers. I mean, you had Sims.
All right, so Kate
Yeah,
and Dusty.
Johnny.
Tell you a little story about Dusty Rhodes, the guy that made all the animals around the island. Married to Kate Matthews. One Halloween, my daddy wanted to make me the Humpback of Notre Dame. So we go over there, Dusty, and he asked Dusty, "Can you make him a humpback?" Because Dusty knew how to use wire. He was a real good with making that wire molds and stuff. Dusty made me a hunchback, right? And he made it where it would come over my shoulder a little. It would push my head down like that. Hey, I won first prize, a big old silver dollar. And I still got it. Still have all my silver dollars. I won 7 out of 8 years. But Dusty made that big old hump for me. And I remember sitting there and having to wait while he did that, man. He'd put that thing on me and he'd bend it and he'd pull it off and he'd bend it and he'd put it back on. I had to wait and get it all in there. I was probably about 5th or 6th grade then. But I won. His humpback looked pretty darn good. But I watched him build a lot of those animals. I watched him build the big horse, the biggest one, that big horse he had. Whatever happened, all those are gone now, right?
Peter Helfrich used to have a bunch of them, and
Yes.
I don't think there
They got
are
busted
any
up by
more
some kids.
left.
So they just couldn't salvage them and threw them away, huh?
I don't know that there's any existing.
There's one left.
Let me guess, you have it.
No. You don't know where it's at?
Not off the top of my head.
Ooh, I stumped y'all.
I may know. I'd have to think about it.
Think about it, man. I tell you what, a man that's named after a cartoon character has it.
Just
He used to be a mayor of Port Aransas, for God's sakes. He lives in a house that's been here forever. He lived in the Terrence house. Remember where the Terrence house was?
Charlie.
Charlie
Yes,
Brown.
it does. You're right. Brown.
Bingo. I gave it up
Oh, I
clues.
remember it there.
That lion. He still has the lion.
Yes, behind the fence. Isn't it?
Yeah, I think he hit it, didn't he? He still has the lion. That's pretty cool. It's the only one I think is left. Everything else got torn up. Peter had the giraffe. He had the burro. What else did he have? There's pictures of that somewhere. I think you have them, don't you? He had all that stuff. I've always wanted to build one of those because I watched Dusty build them. Never quite done it yet, though. I've never been able to pull it off where I thought I was brave enough to go waste a bunch of concrete. Because they were heavy. Really, the heavy part was the pedestal he put them on. Because the bodies were all hollow. They were just built up. But he was a really good artist. I mean, they really looked real.
Mhm.
That stuff looked real. And all that's left is pictures of him except for one lion. Wonder if you could get him to donate that one to the museum.
Where would you put it?
Yeah. Put
Limited,
it out there in the
limited
middle.
room.
I'd put it out in the middle of the pond.
Okay, what other old timers?
Okay, what other old timers? God,
I mean, you had who had the most character of all of them? Who do you remember the
I
most?
know Woody Owsley was one of my favorite old timers to talk to because he was my neighbor my whole life. Okay, when I was a real little kid, Woody's boys were quite a bit older than me. I'd say they were at least 10 years older than me.
Except for Scott.
Except for Scott, he was younger than me.
Another Scott.
But Scott wasn't there then, not when I was growing up as a kid in that house. He wasn't born yet. And He's like 5 years younger than me. And Woody would come over there and bring me toys from his sons that they'd be laying around the house and they'd have outgrown them, right? Trucks and stuff. He'd always bring them over and give them to me. Call me Little Willie. Hey, Little Willie, you want these? I go, yeah. So I had Woody bringing them from one direction. And then there was Brother Tompkins, who was the preacher at the Assembly of God Church, which was the theater and is now the Wild Horse. He lived in that house next door. It got torn down. He had 2 boys about the same age. He'd bring me their toys. I had a stack of toys from all the neighborhood kids. And I was the only little kid growing up, you know, so I kind of got them. And but back to Woody, I really liked talking to Woody in the last years when he could still remember a lot of stuff. He remembered quite a bit. And of course, I like the stories he told about my grandfather, but he'd tell me about the waterfront. And I had found his name on the 1930 census. And it said Woody Owsley, head of household. He was 15. So I saw him one day and I says, man, Woody, you were pretty good. You were a head of household at 15. You must have been really kicking butt out there in the world. He said, Willie, let me tell you what. He said, my household was the bench behind Green's Fish House. And I laughed. I said, I kind of figured it was something like that. And he said after his dad had left him here, he really didn't have a place to go yet. Tom hadn't adopted him basically yet. Tom Matthews finally kind of like took him in and then took care of him. And buddy, don't you ever say frondolage in front of Woody Owsley. It's frandolig. And he would get on me for saying frondolage, man. I still say it. Can't help myself because that's how I've heard it so much in my life. But he would tell me he knew the man. It was frandolig. So I said, okay, I try to get it right. And but he told me about when my grandpa got here. Told me that all the guys that would come down here to work, when they first got here, they had the bachelor's place was where Al Mora's place is now, next to Woody's up on that grassy hill. There's where the boat park sometimes. The what the heck the big shrimp are called? Nixon's boat.
Oh, Pollyanna.
Yeah, Pollyanna parked there sometimes. But in that slough area, Woody said what these guys would do is when they come in as bachelors, they'd live out there in a tent until they made enough money to get them a place on the island and get married and settle down and build a house. So I'm trying to put a timeline together in my head for all this. I know my grandpa got here in 27. He got married in 29 to my grandma. And by 1930, they're living on Robert Street in a house that was worth $700, which I guess that was a lot for a house back then. Then that was the house that John Mercer built that house for him. Okay? And no bathroom. You went to the outhouse. When I was a kid growing up, we used to have chickens in the yard all the time, right? And for eggs, because that was just the old way you kept your animals around. The outhouses were gone by then. They put a bathroom in by then. And but Woody tell me that's what they do. They go out there and they come in and they live in a tent and just stay there until they finally got it all together and they get a place. And some of them came in. He told me this too. He said a lot of them came in like the squatters that would come in and just squat on a piece of land and hope they could eventually get it in their name. It didn't always work that way. You know, when Frondolig came here, came in 1901, September the 18th, 1901, I have a deed. He bought a piece of property, 5 acres, with a 2-story house, several outbuildings, and fenced in on the north end of Mustang Island. And I'm assuming it was right next to the sand hills over there because there used to be a 2-story house. They were really old when I was a kid growing up. It was ramshackle by then, no windows or nothing. The roof was blown off of it, but we played in it. It was 2 stories. And it sat right where Pee Wee Belcher built that big gray house that's there now. And there was no road back there then. You went down dirt trails to get to it. So anyhow, I got this deed to that. And in the deed, it's very well laid out. He bought it from a guy named Mr. Perrineau, who on the 1910 census, I think it was, no, the 1900 census, he's on there. He was a jeweler. That's what he did for a living. He lived here, but he was a jeweler. And he sold that land to him. It's all handwritten, 3 pages, Mark, handwritten. Several times it says, you will not be able to patent this land. Well, that was a bad thing to tell Frowsy Frondolig, okay? Because that's what he did. He was a surveyor when he came here in the 1830s. Santa Anna sent him. This is a story we've got from one of the great. C'est moi. Espérate. Hey, call me back. I love you. Bye.
That was quick.
My daughter. But anyway, so it said that, but when Frontenac came here, he came on a surveying junket for Santa Ana supposedly to clear up a land dispute between two impresarios around the Sweeney Switch area. So he knew surveying, that's what he knew to do. And then he ended up coming over and taking over it was where the packing plant was on what they called Frontenac Island then, but now it's Key Allegra, right? And he had a family when he came the first time. They were killed by Comanches, but he raised another family when he got over here. And
Now he came from Germany,
Frontenac came from Budapest, Hungary.
Hungary.
Yeah, and the story we got with this is that he came with his father and his mother. And his mother was from Saragossa, Spain, and that the father was there in 1815 fighting with Napoleon against the Spaniards. And he got his wife out of Saragossa, Spain. She went back to Budapest, and they came to Mexico City. So I'm assuming they spoke very good Spanish. Came to Mexico City, and then Browsey, who was a really young man in his 20s around that time, came up here to do that job. Then they ended up over there. Well, I found a court document from like 1864 or 65 where there was a huge land dispute between him and Mr. Fulton, who was developing the Rockport-Fulton area, over some accrued land where some dirt had built up or something. There was somewhere it was touching or something, and Fulton was trying to claim that whole island because of the touching. And Frontenac went against him in court. Frontenac won. It was really cool. You can find that on the internet. I can't remember where I got it, but I got a copy of it somewhere. It's the whole legal thing, the description and the fight against old Fulton. And he won that dispute. So I'm thinking, when he bought this land from Perno, he thought he was going to win that dispute too. I don't know that he did, because I've never heard anybody in my family going, wow, we got 5 acres on most things. Boy, wouldn't that be nice to have nowadays? So I guess he didn't, because he died in 07. Everybody begins to disappear around that time. My great-grandmother is on the 1900 census with her husband. In 1905, I find another marriage record for her to another guy on the island here, which apparently tells me her husband had just died, and she got married again, because they didn't divorce in those days. And then in 1910, I find the guy that she married on the census married again for the second time. So I'm thinking, man, and she doesn't appear anymore. So I'm thinking, man, now she's died, okay? Before her, she had a sister and a brother-in-law. They both disappeared between 1880 and 1900. And in the process, in 1901, there's a little boy living with my great-great-grandmother here who has the same last name as that sister and that brother-in-law of hers. So I'm thinking, well, something must have happened to them. They've disappeared. I can't find them anywhere on the census, but the little boy is still there, okay? The little boy doesn't show up again until 1910 as an older man, and she's gone by then. And then, of course, in 1923, her sister died. So I'm thinking they all died of, like, tuberculosis.
Diseases.
Yeah, diseases were getting, because that's what the sister died of. And it was pretty virulent back then. You know, there was no cure. There was no penicillin in those days to take care of that kind of stuff with. And all I can imagine, because you can't find death certificates for them. I've searched. I went to Rockport, poured through what they had. I've gone to Corpus and poured through what they had. And those are the only 2 places you'd probably find a death certificate around here. Marriage licenses back then, you'd find them in Rockport. That's where I found most of them. I did find my great-grandmother's from 1909 in Corpus. But most of them I found in Rockport, because that was the closest county seat for them to go to. And then, smile, Mark. This is where I am, okay? I love this world. Okay. This will say, stop that for a minute, we're talking about technology for a second. Well, you might want to leave it up. Okay. First of all, the video stuff and the picture stuff. Okay. So I was telling you about the videos. Okay, the first video I worked with to preserve was our home movies on old Super 8 film, the reels and running the projectors and all that stuff. Then, of course, when we got older, we got video cameras that shot tapes, right? Big old VHS tapes. But even that one extinct, right? But you got all these tapes, and you've already recorded everything on it. So now you have to get to the next generation without losing any of it. Because if you don't, if you wait too long, you lose the machine to do that on, or the tape gets bad. So the next thing I did was I took my VHS tape, and I had bought me a new what they call high 8 camera, which is a cassette with high 8 film in it, or not film but tape, and recorded it onto the high 8. I've got it to high 8, but there's still not much I can do with it but keep it on tape, because we haven't quite come out with a really good DVD recorder yet. So I have stacks and stacks. I got all the old videotape, I kept it. Then I got all the high 8 tapes, waiting to go somewhere. All right. Finally, they come out with a DVD player that's decent, but it doesn't have a good format. So I'll make a few with that, but I realize, man, it's not that good, right? Then all of a sudden, they come out with the small tape. So, okay, the small tape is very highly digital. So it can come out clean and go into the computer. So then I transfer it to the smaller tape, the mini DVDs, run it into the computer, then burn DVD. Oh my God almighty.
What is yours on here, man?
Hey, what you got?
73?
It's as far as you go, 73?
Oh, no, we got these out here.
I don't think you guys had a ton of pictures. When does it disappear?
The old, I'm thinking about old families now. Pop Sims, how far back did the Sims family go?
Okay. I line this one out for you because they're family. Okay, between 1900 and 1910, a family came here. It was William Joseph Simonton and Margaret Emily Simonton. They brought 2 sons and a daughter with them. Okay, their daughter's name was Mary. Okay, Simonton. My great grandfather, their son, his name was Ezra, and there was another one named Jack. Jack took off and went back up the Sabine Pass to work on a jetty they were building up there for Port Arthur. Okay, his brother stayed here and worked on this jetty with his father, who was 76, working on the jetty at the time, by the way.
So they came here specifically for
To
the
do
work.
the jetty work. They followed the jetty work. They worked on them in Port Arthur, and they came down here to work on this one because it was freshly started, and that one was getting done. Okay, Mary Simonton married Alan Sims, the older Alan Sims, who was in the life-saving service. Okay, how he got here, I don't know what he's doing here. He might have been stationed here for a while, but he went to Galveston. When he got out, he came back here, though. Okay, because her parents were here. Okay, and then my great-grandfather Ezra married my grandmother, who was Amanda's daughter. Okay, and what's really weird is in the 1910 census, my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother are living with the Simontons, who is Mary Sims's parents, right? And they're living in that property over there on the corner of Church and Roberts. And I know that in 1910, my grandmother was born in October. The census was April, so I'm sure she was very pregnant with my grandma at the time. So I'm figuring my grandma was born in that house because it's where they did it back then. And in fact, Katie Merkovich was the midwife who delivered my mother and my uncles, both my uncles and my aunt, when she was at that age. But anyway, so I lived here, and the old man, Simonton, died in 1914. No one could figure that out. Then I figured out that was his grave out there, and it's marked 1914. Because everything came together. My property deed is dated 1914. Ezra bought that land I live on in 1914. So I'm assuming that when the old man died, he must have left something, and Sims ended up at that property, and Ezra got this property over here. I mean, they were neighbors, basically. The only thing between them was Cedar Hill. That was it. It was huge right there beside them. So I'm putting it together that that's exactly what happened. And this is what we were talking about on the Facebook thing. And I keep doing this thing, Mark. How many times have I done it on my own grandpa now?
Oh, yeah.
At least 3 times. I was talking to Mary Martin the other day, and there was a picture I put a picture up there of all the Martins. Annie Mae Martin Sims, who married Alan Sims Jr. Lawrence Martin is on there, Mary's father. And a few of them are on there. I saw Martin's plus the grandmother. And I says, let me think. I said, your aunt Annie Mae married Alan Sims, who is my great aunt's son. What does that make us? Because when I did this family tree, I started thinking about all these marriage kins that are in there. Barney was telling me somehow Pinky Farley was kin to me through, who did he say she married that was kin to me? She said, that makes me kin to you. And I said, oh my God, Barney, no. But it was so tangled up. It just gets so tangled up. You know, my new wife had a daughter with hair of red. My father married her and had a baby. And I love that song. It's so funny. It so describes Port Aransas. Man, it was so tangled
Well, a
up.
lot of small towns.
Well, a lot of small towns, yeah, you know. The new blood here was Coast Guard. You know, my daddy, he was the new blood. He came in, and that's where a lot of women married Coast Guardsmen back then. I mean, think about how many have married Coast Guard guys online that we're talking to. Nellie did. No, Ann did. Dubby did. My daddy was talking about that one picture I put on there. It was Howard Walters, Horace Cran.
Yes.
Yeah, Cran, and the other guy left. But and my daddy took the picture. He said, so out of the 4 Coast Guard guys there, 3 of us married island girls. So, and that's fun that both of those people one of them saw their dad on there, and one of them saw her husband on there.
2 of my sister-in-laws married.
Yeah, they did. That's right. Wanda did,
Yes,
and Judy did,
yeah.
right? Yeah, married Coast Guard guys. But you know, that's their way to get out of here in most cases.
Have you sat down and tried to put together a genealogy, or
I've done the genealogy
or is it
for
in
the
your head?
Frontalage bunch, and I'm working that online. I put the big tree on there all the way from Frowsy and Hana. And I've worked on it a little bit, and all I did was put on there, and the reason I did this, Mark, was because I was always asked, well, who all's here still? So I did a kind of a little thing with who all's here to show where they all came from. But now that we got this thing going, I put it out there. Most of them are on there. And I said, okay, so-and-so, you've got this line. So-and-so, you've got this line. So-and-so, you've got this line. Put it back up there. And so far, I've got two. The Bouillon line from
Missy.
Old Charles
And then
down.
Missy.
And Missy from the Haddons. Got all the Haddons. And the
Listers.
listers. And that's Bouillon. So the whole Bouillon side's answered up now. Okay, I'm waiting for Carol Chandler. She needs to get it with me. And I've still missed, there's still a part of the tree up there. Who was it I was just talking about missing the other day that's not even on the Matthews tree yet?
Linda and them? Sonny?
Yeah, it was Sonny and him. Because Todd, I haven't even got them on there yet. I mean, it's just a huge undertaking. It's a huge undertaking to sit down and do a family tree like that. Because then you start thinking, wait a minute, there was so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so.
There's so many kids.
Yeah, I know going back. I just don't know going down. I know up to a certain amount. I know like up to Todd and Jay and Sissy on Sonny's thing, Anton. I know that far. But then, of course, there was other ones back further. Just a great undertaking. So the best thing for everybody to do on there is go back to, say, a grandmother or a great-grandmother and do a family tree from here. Because, see, I did my own family tree. My brother giving me a hard time about it.
I read that.
I gave him some backside messaging, believe me. We had it out. He finally called and apologized to me. I let him have it. I can't say on this camera what I said to him. Well, because you know what? I told him, if you can't be constructive, just don't be. He always got all those smarty remarks of his. Said, don't be constructive. I don't know who those kids are that my aunt's had. I'm not that in contact with them as he is up there. You know, if there's 4 people need to go on that tree. He has a copy of that. Because when we did our family reunion in 2000, I made a book. It's called The Ulch Family, and it's all about everything from my grandma and grandpa down to us from the Ulch side. There's pictures of everybody. There's the names of everybody that was in existence in 2000. It's all in there. And he has a copy of that. There's a picture of the tree at the back, and it goes up like a tree, and there's branches, and there's names on each one like leaves. All he has to do is go in there to the pen and go, okay, here's this, and here's this. It's easy enough to keep up with. And everybody should do that. And another thing everybody should do, write 3 pages of something or a page and a half about an experience or something that you did growing up. I do that all the time. I get a book that thick just from writing here and there. You know, I write a page and a half about this, 2 pages about that, 3 pages. Still, you got the most press so far. That was a pretty good story.
something else that occurs to me? The museum is really, because that's just the way it started. It was focused on kind of the black and white photos, but this place was a real happening place back in the late '60s and the '70s
Yeah.
and the hippie era. What do you have any remembrances of that? And people come because there was some new blood came to town when the university and
I remember
Early '70s.
early
I
'70s.
mean, I know my class at school. When I moved
Yeah.
here in '69, I made the 9th